everyone, my name is Josh and this one's Coin Interesting Musings, and today I'm going to be continuing my top 10 list of films films and TV shows that I will never review on this channel. And getting straight into it, for number 5, I'm going to say my number 5 pick will be David Cronenberg's Crash. For no other particular reason other than I think, even though it's one of those films which I think, even though I love David Cronenberg's films, I'll happily sing his praises about anything that he does. I feel like Crash was one of those films where I feel like, even though it is a good film and it does have a lot of stuff to offer and it does have a lot of controversy surrounding it, I feel like Crash is one of those films where it's in that category of film where I feel like I've seen it, I've watched it, it was a good film, but nothing about it really screams, oh, I've got to watch this again kind of vibe. And I know that seems very weird because you are literally, when you do include a film that you really like or you really think is good or you think is enjoyable, you'll happily watch it again. Like, you'll happily just switch it on any time of day or whatever it happens to be. But the fact that I literally, watched this and I felt like I don't really have any desire to see this film again, it really goes to show that it is equally as good, but it's equally as divisive a film. But I feel like I want to defend the film a little bit because a lot of people tend to get the impression that on the surface it seems like a very badly acted, badly directed, badly written film. But if you really think about the concept, it's basically about a bunch of people who, to cut a long story short, it's about people who get turned on by the act of witnessing car crashes or being involved in car crash collisions. And if you really think about it from that perspective, a lot of the dialogue and a lot of the way the dialogue is performed really does make sense, because you really do kind of get this impression that these people are detached from reality. They're so detached from reality that they literally look at very extraordinary developments in their lives with a certain element of, oh, it's fascinating, it's alluring, but it's short-lived, I suppose you could say. And I think that adds a certain level of complexity. It adds a certain level of, you're not supposed to identify with these people kind of vibes, where you're supposed to look at it from the point of view of like a fly on the wall type of effect, where you're supposed to be looking at these characters from an outsider perspective, where you're not supposed to identify with them or anything like that. It is supposed to have that vibe. But that's the reason why I want to, want to not talk about this film, because I feel like even though it is a good film, I've seen it once and I don't really need to see it again. It's that kind of vibe. So that's my number 5, David Cronenberg's Crash. And my number 4 is going to be the 50 Shades trilogy, both the books and the film, because I was one of the people who literally, when 50 Shades of Grey came out, it was one of those books that immediately captured my interest because of the cover. Like the cover, that blue lace background with sort of like that silver tie, that really kind of, caught my attention. And I thought, oh, maybe it's a murder mystery story or something like that, or a murder mystery trilogy. But then when I found out what it was, and I found out that it was so badly received, I kind of, just avoided it. And I ended up, out of curiosity, reading the first couple of pages. And I found myself, I'm not even joking, getting so bored by what was happening. And the writing was so terrible that I ended up, just throwing it away. But then again, I just did something that I never thought I would be able to do, which is I actually put the book on my shelf in my room, and I found myself thinking, I don't want that book to be there. I don't want my grandparents coming in to see me in my room and to see that I've got that book on my shelf, or anything like that, or any of my family members to see that I've got 50 Shades of Grey on my shelf. So I thought, instead of, just leaving it somewhere else, I impulsively, rather stupidly, just decided to tear up the book and put it in the bin. And I never do that. I never tear up a book, but I felt like, because it's 50 Shades of Grey, it's not high art or anything like that, I thought, okay, let's just tear the book up and then just put it away in the bin. And I literally hated it. I literally hated the act of doing that, like tearing that book up, but I felt like I needed to, because I didn't want it on my shelf. I didn't want it in my room. And because a lot of people might have that kind of reaction, like, oh, you're reading that book, are you, kind of thing. But yeah, it was one of those books, but the reason why I'm not going to talk about it is I feel like everyone who's anyone has basically just crapped all over it. No one's, said its praises or said it has good ideas or anything like that, or good characters. Everyone said a bad thing about it, and I never ever go for a film or a TV show that's been universally panned or universally hated, because I feel like that's just a very terrible thing to do. So to me, I think that's really, really awful. So that's why I'm not going to be reviewing any of the trilogy. I'm not going to be reviewing any of the films, because I feel like even though Danny Elfman is doing did the music for that trilogy, I feel like he's absolutely wasted on just having him be there alone. And it's very sad. So yeah, I'm that's one of the films that I'm not going to be reviewing for my number 4. And moving on to my number 3 spot, I'm going to pick the Devil's Rejects trilogy. In fact, no, actually, I changed my mind. I'm going to be picking the Dark Knight trilogy. And the reason why I'm going to be picking the Dark Knight trilogy is because I feel like even though it's a good film series, it's critically acclaimed across the board, it literally has so many good reviews, I literally look at it and I feel very intimidated, because I feel like anyone who's anyone has literally sung this film trilogy's praises, and I feel like, what can I add to the conversation? What can I add that hasn't already been said about this particular trilogy before? So that's why I feel compelled to kind of just say, well, okay, I'm just gonna, leave it to the actual, critics, and actually the people who've sung this trilogy's praises, and just say, well, I can't add anything more to the conversation. I feel like anything that I do add is just going to be a repetition of what someone else has said before in the past. So I do feel very sad, because Batman is one of my favourite characters of all time, and I feel like me not tackling the Dark Knight trilogy is kind of like me doing a disservice to my fan love for, the Batman character and the Batman mythology. So I do feel very sad about that, but I do feel very strongly the fact that I don't want to tackle the Dark Knight trilogy, because what can I add? But again, this is where you guys come in the comments. Like, I hope you guys can, get in touch with me and say, help convince me, change my mind about, that particular option, or any of the options that I've chosen on this so far, in both this one and part 1. Because I feel like I could change my mind. I could change my mind about a lot of things, but you guys could potentially convince me, if you want to, like, convince me in what films you think I should not talk about on the channel, or what I should talk about on the channel, because that's important. So yeah, I'm probably going to change my mind at some point, but I am sticking to it as of now, that I won't be reviewing the Dark Knight trilogy on this channel, because I feel like, what else could I add to the conversation that hasn't already been said? So that's my number 3, and my number 2 spot will be going to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974, and or the sort of, 70s, 80s video nasty trend, films like Cannibal Holocaust and I Spit on Your Grave, and all these other things. And I suppose I'm going to also throw another series of films in there. I'm going to be talking about the Eli Roth films, because I feel like I'm not a fan of his work. I really hate Eli Roth's storytelling. I hate the fact that he's, this very kind of... He basically writes these very glorified gore fests, but at the same time he writes these very compelling ideas. Like, the idea for Hostel is actually really disturbing, but yet very interesting as well. Like, the idea of basically taking that idea of having tourists go to this very, remote location, only to be tricked by a bunch of businessmen into, being tortured by them. That's an interesting idea. It's kind of like, sallow but a little less excrement eating kind of thing. But it really kind of has that feel to it, so it has that flavour. So it is interesting, but I just feel like all the characters in his films are unlikable assholes. All of them are awful. They're frat boy type, characters who I could just imagine one of them shouting "Nerd" from Revenge of the Nerds or something like that. Like, they're so beefy and so, pig-headed almost. It really just kind of feels really kind of annoying that these characters are meant to be the characters that we're rooting for to survive. And I wish the characters in Eli Roth's films had more dimension and more likability. But I do have to give him credit. He does occasionally, have, moments of genius in him, where he does have these interesting concepts. Like the idea of cabin fever, a flesh-eating disease, that if you scratch yourself, you're going to take chunks of flesh off yourself. It really kind of adds a new level of paranoia and getting sick and all these other things that already is stirring around in a lot of people's heads. But they just have very unlikable characters and very goofy dialogue and very stupid dialogue as well. And I just kind of feel like, well, I don't really want to tackle his films because they kind of keep pulling me from pillar to post of whether or not I should talk about them or not. And it just kind of feels like a bit of a headache. And I'm also going to talk about, the exploitation films of Cannibal Holocaust, I Spit on Your Grave, and all these other films because I feel like they're culturally significant, but I feel like they don't really add anything to me in the grand scheme of things. Like I Spit on Your Grave basically is a feminist film, but it's also very graphic and very gory and very intense. But I feel like if you want to do an alternative to I Spit on Your Grave, I'd much rather have a cleaner version like the film Promising Young Woman, because that film's very well written. It has a good performance by Kerry Mulligan at the heart of it. So I feel like if I am going to do a version of I Spit on Your Grave, I'll probably do, Promising Young Woman or any film of that nature, because I feel like they're much more better written films and they're much more interesting characters and they have much more compelling dialogue. Whereas the problem with I Spit on Your Grave is it has sort of like that 70s exploitation edge, and I kind of feel like that's a very difficult thing to talk about. So to me, I'm going to avoid those films, and I'm going to avoid the films of Eli Roth. And my number one film series that I'll never review, or film or TV series that I'll never review on this channel, is... First of all, I'm going to have an honourable mention because I feel like I need to talk about this series. So an honourable mention, very quickly, just one more spot. The honourable mention will be Gotham, the TV series Gotham, because I feel like this series really had me in terms of what it wanted to do. Like I'm a huge fan of prequel series to popular IPs, like say for example Bates Motel or Hannibal. Loved those two shows, watched those two shows when they came out on cable. But what I really hated was when Gotham had the chance to do it, when Batman had the chance to do it, when Gotham had the chance to do it, it was like, okay, let's take the Batman mythology and let's just redo it, but except don't have Batman in it. And I feel like that's the essential thesis of this entire thing. And this was created by Bruno Heller, who did shows like The Mentalist, and he did a couple of episodes of CSI. So to me, I kind of felt like, oh, he could do something very fun and very quirky with this. But to me, I feel like what he's done is he's basically just recreated the Batman mythology, but without Batman in it. And that's essentially what it is. Like, you had the chance to do a prequel series to Gotham. You had the opportunity to talk about Gotham as a city before Batman even existed. What can you do with this? Well, let's talk about the Waynes. Talk about what they stood for and everything that they kind of, talked about, and all that symbol of hope and prosperity and all those sorts of things that they were preaching in the Batman Begins film. But this time you get to see them actually enact it. You get to see them actually be role models for the city, be symbols of hope. You get to see, Thomas Wayne struggling as a doctor at the hospital. You get to see, Martha Wayne try to, upkeep the house and try to, make sure everything's going okay and try to be a good support system for Thomas when he's at the hospital and he actually sees someone die on the table. Had to feel like he's letting someone down, even though he's loaded with money and all these other things. You can really have them be built up as really good characters. And then, of course, you could focus on Jim Gordon, him, starting off in the precinct and him basically slowly being, subjected to the corruption of the cops in the city. But then you can have, that being an entire season and then having to struggle with the, crime and everything like that, the original Sin City vibe stuff. And then in season 2, 3... then you introduce Bruce Wayne as a baby. Like you introduce him as a baby at the end of season 2 or halfway through season 2, and then you have the night where they get murdered in season 3 or halfway through season 2 or towards the end of season 2. So it really does feel like you're saying goodbye to a really big cast of characters as opposed to, oh, it's just Thomas and Martha Wayne, Batman's parents. That would have worked much better. But what does this show do? It basically just says, well, we're just going to recreate the scene where Thomas and Martha Wayne get murdered again, and Bruce is just sitting there on his hands and knees looking down at them like he does in every visage of the comic. And it's just like, can we stop showing the death of the Waynes, please? Because they've died so many times, and they've never had a chance to really get fleshed out. Neither of them have. even Martha Wayne in Batman Begins doesn't really get much of a line other than, oh, Bruce, and things like that. So you really do kind of get this impression that the Waynes don't really matter in the grand scheme of things. They're like Uncle Ben in the sense that they're there for 5 minutes, and then they're meant to say a few philosophical things, and then they get shot and die. That's all that happens, and it's really infuriating because you really get the chance to really flesh out these characters a little bit more, but they don't even bother, and that's what's really annoying. And then the rest of the show just basically throws whatever it wants at you, and hopefully you'll just take it. And it's really kind of annoying, and it really made me hate this show very quickly, that it really just didn't care about what kind of stories it wanted to pursue. Rather it wanted to do the Joel Schumacher thing, where it wanted to be dark and gothic and gritty, but then at the same time it wanted to have some of the camp from the Adam West series, and it just kind of had a bit of an identity crisis. So I won't be reviewing the show because I actually really don't like it, because it's the worst representation of Batman I've ever seen in a long time, and that's my honourable mention. But now we're finally here. Number one, drum roll please. The number one film that I won't be reviewing for this channel will be The Devil's Rejects, or the Firefly Family trilogy, or the Three from Hell trilogy. And simply put, anything to do with Rob Zombie, basically. Excuse me. Anything to do with Rob Zombie, basically, I will not be reviewing, because all of his films tend to have the same kind of aesthetic to it, which is they involve a bunch of, redneck, arsehole serial killers going around shouting, screaming profanities at people, whilst also, throwing stuff across tables, grabbing people by the hair, doing all sorts of unspeakable things to them. And it's all done in the name of exploitation and tasteless art. That's all it's meant to be doing. And it really just kind of feels very one note to me. It doesn't really feel like it adds any real depth or any real character. The actors in this do a very good job, though. I feel that Sid Haig is a very good Captain Spaulding. He plays that character very well. And so does Bill Moseley. He plays Otis very well. But I feel like what really is annoying is that Rob Zombie's dialogue feels like a 13-year-old first discovered poetry, and he wants to basically throw whatever poetry he thinks he heard into the conversation, and it really makes it really annoying, because to me, I think Rob Zombie can be a very good filmmaker, and he can be a very good storyteller. I think if he focused on animation as opposed to live action, I think he could go places, and he could do this very interesting thing where he could be both of style and of substance, instead of just all style and no substance. But to me, I just think it's really annoying, because the stuff that he can do when he isn't, shouting profanities at people's faces, he can create these very interesting characters. Like, there's this one character in House of Thousand Corpses called Dr. Satan, who at the very end of the film, spoiler alert, is shown to be alive, and he's basically a cybernetic enhanced human who does experiments on people to basically create the ultimate cyberhuman, or the ultimate, immortal. And he looks very creepy, but he also looks very alluring in a very bizarre way. Like, he's a wonderful sort of like Tim Burton style hybrid of being very, disturbing, but also having a certain charm to him as well. And I really like that. I like that fact that he actually put effort into that image, and he doesn't say a word. That's the key with Rob Zombie's films, is the characters who don't say a word are the far more interesting people, because they don't say a word, but you really do get the sense of show don't tell, or less is more. And that's something that I really do think is his strength. When he's allowed to just let things play out and not have characters speak, that's when he can really shine as a filmmaker. But I think when characters speak, they don't really say anything worthwhile to me. It's just like, if you were to show this on the Jerry Springer show, for example, you'd hear bleeping every once in a while. Like, you'd hear a very loud ringing in your ears because they're swearing so much. Like, if I wanted to see rednecks scream at each other and throw stuff at each other and want to kick each other's heads in, I'd watch the Jerry Springer show. That's how I feel about Rob Zombie's films. They're not very well written, they're not very interesting, and Rob Zombie is just one of those filmmakers who I'm very infuriated by, because there are little hints of genius in him, but they just kind of decide not to show themselves whenever he's making these Devil's Rejects films, or any of his films that he's ever made. And he relies so much on shock value that he kind of forgets that, sometimes people just don't want to watch this, or aren't you worried that this isn't going to age well? And I really hate the fact that a lot of people sing his praises for The Devil's Rejects, but here's the thing. The Devil's Rejects isn't the best sequel since Evil Dead 2. No sequel is going to measure up in that respect. But to me, I think the stuff that people praise about that film, like the scene where Otis comes in with the mask of a man's face that he's actually cut off and worn as a mask, and he does hand puppets with the with the with the face, and the wife's just reacting and being very terrified. Everyone says in Bravo's 100 greatest scary moments of all time, or is it the 30 even scarier moments of all time? I can't remember which one of the spin-offs it was, but one of them talked about The Devil's Rejects, and one of the people who were on it said, you're not expecting that visual. And part of me feels like, well, you are if you've seen House of a Thousand Corpses, but that's where the critics are clever. They say things like, oh, you don't have to watch The Devil's Rejects. The House of a Thousand Corpses, you don't have to watch House of a Thousand Corpses. The House of a Thousand Corpses isn't really all that good, so you can skip it and you can go straight to The Devil's Rejects, because let's face it, if you watched the Devil's Rejects, if you watch House of a Thousand Corpses and The Devil's Rejects, critics will be thinking, oh, it's wonderful visuals, but isn't it a bit repetitive? Like that would be the overall assessment, really. And I think that's one of the things that I really just don't like about Rob Zombie is everyone kind of highlights how great he is as an artist, but if you really think about it, a lot of the stuff in his films are very repetitive. Like you have the scene where Otis cuts off someone's face and wears it as a mask to taunt one of the victims. He does that in House of a Thousand Corpses. He also does that in The Devil's Rejects. He also there's also a scene where a character that he uses this celluloid home video projector style, filming to highlight a character that, oh, they're a family kind of thing. He does this 3 times, or 4 times if you count the Halloween remake. Once in House of a Thousand Corpses to the dad who just dies unceremoniously whilst the song I Remember You is playing in the background, and they show that scene where it's them at Christmas and he's wearing the Santa hat and they're all laughing and joking, and then he just falls to the floor dead. And then of course you have it in Devil's Rejects at the end with Captain Spaulding, Sherry Moon Zombie's character, and Otis. And I just think, I don't care about these characters. They've done horrible things. Why should I give a shit about them? And then again in 31, where they have all the main victims come into, like do a roundup. Like, oh, isn't it sad that these victims died during this horrific Hunger Games done by Rob Zombie thing? And it really just kind of makes it really annoying, because to me, I think Rob Zombie is one of those filmmakers who doesn't really have anything to offer, in my opinion. And I don't really like his films, so that's going to be the number 1 film for the series of films that I won't be doing, anything by Rob Zombie. So yeah, that's my list. I hope you guys all enjoyed. Let me know what you thought of these selections in the comments. Let me know which ones you thought deserved a bit of a second look, and try to convince me which ones do you think I should actually review on the channel, or should give a second chance, because I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts. And if you liked this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content. I hope you're all having a very good day. This has been Josh with Whimsical and Interesting Musings. Take care, bye for now.